Hi, I'm Michael Azarad, Editor-in-Chief of the Talkhouse, and welcome to the Talkhouse Music Podcast. This edition of the Talkhouse Music Podcast features Fred Thomas, longtime mainstay of the beloved idiosyncratic lo-fi indie pop band Saturday Looks Good to Me, and musician, motivational speaker, producer, nightclub impresario, advice columnist, and TV and radio host Andrew W.K. Maybe some people don't know this, but Mr. Thomas and Mr. W.K. go back a long way, 20 years, to when they were teenagers in the very weird and wild Ann Arbor, Michigan underground music scene. They're still good buds, as you're about to hear, and W.K. even guested on a song on Thomas's acclaimed new solo album, All Are Saved, which came out this spring. These are two thoughtful, well-spoken, and very experienced musicians, and there's so much great stuff in this conversation about what it's like to be a musician, any kind of musician. This is the kind of thing you won't get in an ordinary interview, so listen closely for an explanation of why your audience is your enemy, the value of criticism, a realistic definition of artistic success, the intersection of life and art, and the mysterious miracle of artistic inspiration. They recorded their conversation at Thomas's old apartment in Ann Arbor. He's since moved, but Thomas wanted us to know that the apartment was located above the manager's office of the trailer park where Iggy Pop grew up. And with that, here we go, Fred Thomas and Andrew W.K. in conversation for the Talkhouse Music Podcast.
Hello, my name is Andrew W.K., and today I'll be interviewing an old friend of mine, and I was thinking on the way over here that this friend is one of my only true friends, meaning it's someone that I never paid money to work with or be my friend, as a lot of mine are. So it's a true friend going back, well, about 20 years, 21 years. His name is Fred Thomas.
Hello. Thank you for being here.
We're in Fred's area, his realm, where he has this great microphone set up.
Yep.
And we're talking specifically about the album. We'll talk about all kinds of stuff, but let's get that out of the way just to create a context for the listener here. Now, how long, I've seen many bands that you've done, and many different projects, some sort of in a solo setup, others more formal bands, but even when they were bands, they were definitely led by you, even if they had another name. How long have you been doing Fred Thomas as that name?
Since about 2000. So for a long time. Yeah, no, that's the thing. That's the curious thing about it is I've been doing, it's the kind of thing where like, you know, you've always been doing Andrew WK from the dawn of time. That's just what it's been. And there's been a lot of different people who've been in your bands and whatnot. I've always been doing bands, and people would be like, oh, can your band Saturday Looks Good to Me play this show? And I'd say,
right.
No, I can't. There's too many people in the band. They can't do it. I can do it by myself, though, and then people are always like, not really. No, we didn't kind of want to have, like, what somebody else that wasn't just you, but we're scrambling now, so yes, of course you can do it. And I was like, well, I might as well write some songs that are a little bit different, so it's not just like me playing my band songs.
When I saw you play in Brooklyn,
yeah,
that was a Fred Thomas show.
At Googie's.
At Googie's.
Yeah, on the Lower East Side. That was totally, I just made a new record and played at Googie's. And it was like the last time they had a show. They shut down after that show.
I've shut some venues and TV shows and other things down in my time, so I can relate to that.
It was a complete coincidence. It wasn't because of my show or anything.
I didn't realize. Okay, well.
But it was,
that too. Went out on a high note.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I've been doing that. But it has been something I haven't really paid too much attention to. It's just kind of been a thing where, I kind of like want to go play some shows. Not that many people are available in my different bands. I'll just do it by myself. Or I have these songs that don't really fit anywhere. I'll just put out a record of like those songs. And this most recent record I did in April of this year is called All Are Saved. It was a little bit different because I kind of had something a little bit more important to say with those songs. I haven't really been doing as many bands, or certainly not in the way that I have been in the past, where have a band and we have a statement and we really want to make a record and go on tour. It was kind of more like, well, I want to do all this without a band and not in a casual, fun, low-key DIY way. This is actually something a little bit more serious to me and more important, so I'm going to put more energy into it, and that's kind of why a lot of people who have heard my record this year had never heard of me at all before. They hadn't heard of any of my bands, and, Fred Thomas isn't the name that, like, pops out as, like,
It pops out to me.
Well, I think
That's because I realize who it is.
Yeah, you know who it is. Like there's like a history there, but I didn't change my name to have it be something like interesting. And like I've been doing this music stuff for a long, long time, and most of my bands have been under the radar to some degree. So it's makes sense that even someone so really close friend of mine wouldn't know that I've been doing this particular project under my own name because I haven't really done much with it. I haven't really cared that much.
I see. It was a space that you created to be low pressure while you put more effort into things that were more formal.
Exactly. Thank you for that. That's the best way to put it.
And this album, you put more pressure on yourself.
Much pressure.
And had higher expectations in terms of the recording process.
Yes.
And so you wrote all the songs more or less fresh for the album, or you had some of... Okay.
No, absolutely. It was absolutely the kind of thing that was a process, and there was like a high density pressure on myself to make it really good. And whereas like other stuff I'd done, just like, like a little, 4-track recording at home. And I just always, mess around with 4-track and mess around and have different songs, ideas coming to me all the time. And this was kind of more like a refining process and many, many demos, and then going to the studio in Georgia to kind of like mix it. So it wasn't just something that like had the raw material for, but I didn't do a very good job mixing it. And I worked with my friend Drew Vandenberg, who's an amazing engineer, amazing recording, just sound sculptor, and he really helped make the record a reality in that way.
Why in the past wouldn't you say when someone asked for one of your bands to play that you really did lead, unless I'm misunderstanding? It's like Saturday Looks Good for me. You certainly were the band leader from what I understood. Why wouldn't you just say, I'll play a version of that solo and still keep the name in terms of the recognition that had built? Not to say that this new Fred Thomas record should have not happened or be called Saturday Looks Good to Me, but what kept you from just playing on your own with the other band names?
That's a really good question. I thought about that at certain times over the years, and there would be times I'd be like, okay, Saturday Looks Good to Me is going to come. It's just me and like somebody else playing, and when that would happen, people would get so angry. Oh, people would be like, I thought that Betty was singing in your band. Where's Betty? What's going on? Like, this is like people were so like early on. I played music with this friend of mine, and he was like, "Your audience, that's your enemy. You don't." Which I've been thinking about this. Like that was kind of a corrupting thing to tell a wide-eyed young dumbass who's just getting into music. But he was like, "Yeah, if they are trying to tell you what your music's like, they're wrong. You tell them if they want to hear this one particular song, have like a hit song, like change it, make it sound stupid. You can do whatever you want." The early Saturday Looks Good to Me records, super gentle, kind of like chamber pop, kind of sounds like the Beach Boys, kind of sounds like Belle and Sebastian, and we'd show up at our gigs and it'd be like just 3 under-talented boys playing like kind of nasty garage rock versions of the songs, and people hated it, and they should have. But I had this kind of like bratty mindset. I was like, oh, this is cool.
You were being confrontational in that regard. You weren't going in to cut corners just to cut corners. You were doing something that you were interested in doing, right?
Yeah, but it was from this mindset that was a little bit antagonistic and kind of like anything I do is great, and what a simpleton you must be to go to a show and expect to hear a song. That's so pedestrian. But I actually like maybe like 2 weeks ago, I very rarely like go to a show because I'm like just a big fan. There's lots of stuff I like a lot, but I go to shows all the time. It's usually because a friend of mine's playing or that's the thing to do. But this band called Frankie Cosmos came through. Have you heard them?
Sounds familiar.
It's this woman, Greta Klein. She's just this kid. She's daughter of like Phoebe Cates and Kevin Klein. But she started making these beautiful songs, and they're so like, she made a record last year. Super twee, super just, I love it. So it's really nice songwriting. And they came and played in Detroit. And they're like, we're just going to play a bunch of new stuff. Does anybody want to hear old stuff? And everyone's like, yes, we want to hear the old stuff. They're like, yeah, who fucking cares? We're going to do it anyway. And they just like played. And that's cool. And I appreciate that. I respect that as their right as an artist to do that. And I would do that all the time. But as a fan, I was like, I really just want to hear that one song that I like in front of me, like being played live. I've never heard that live. I don't know what these new songs. They're fine. They're good, but they're not familiar. And I kind of put my audiences through that a lot. to go back to the original question, like that's why. I mean, that would just be like another confounding thing to be like, oh, my band's gonna come through. It's just gonna be me though, and instead of playing all the songs that I'm gonna play like these different things. So
I can relate to both of those sides as well. Being an audience member and also being the performer, giving people what they want and sometimes doing it, as you said, with antagonism, and sometimes doing it with earnestness because I really thought it would be special. And it's good to be thoughtful about all sides of it. And as your friend said, to a degree, try to remain true to yourself without losing touch or developing resentment for the audience, because that I also find is strange. And you can see people doing that, much to their audience's dismay, which some people are lucky enough to keep despite that, and some people lose. So
yeah, definitely.
You gotta be careful.
And it's a strange dynamic between like the audience's expectations. I'm sure you've had people be angry with you because you didn't play a song that they wanted to hear, they figured they had a perception of you that wasn't actually valid or true, wasn't actually happening, and they were just like irate that you didn't live up to that perception that was kind of just had nothing to do with you at all.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes I would understand and I feel bad.
Yeah.
And try to develop the courage to allow myself to feel bad about disappointing them. Because my initial reaction is to get very defiant and, oh, well, they know, and
sure.
I should, like you were saying, and then you hopefully work through that, depending on what your relationship is to the audience. But I ultimately, even with criticism, try to take a deep breath and see, well, maybe there's something true about this, and it might be painful, but maybe there's something to extract. And I actually have learned a lot from reading reviews of shows where they pointed out really good things, sometimes very basic stuff, like the show was too short, which is a compliment, really. They wanted more.
It's too damn short.
So, yeah, sometimes weekends are too short.
Yeah, exactly.
And who wouldn't want another Saturday or Friday?
Yeah.
Or even a Sunday if they could take that up rather than a Monday.
Jam one more Sunday in there and just have it be like a 4-day weekend. It would be just about right.
Well, we get those occasionally thanks to the holidays, so tip of the hat,
of course, to Mr. Holiday.
To all holidays.
The Holiday Inn.
Well, let's go deeper in now, because I am very intrigued, being someone who I've always seen as very productive. You always have seemed to be working a great deal. I'm interested if you think of yourself as very productive, very prolific, or if you sort of find almost the opposite. People think I work really hard. I feel like I'm very lazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel that? I'm lazy?
I mean, everything I've ever seen has pointed towards staunch laziness. But I do feel like you have accomplished a lot. I feel like I've accomplished a lot. I also feel like...
But do you work every day on music?
I do work almost every day on music, and I also sort of don't care in a way. And it's hard to explain. It's hard to kind of come up with. It's kind of a thing where it's like a lot of people work every day on music, and they really love to be like, I am a musician. I work every day on music. And maybe it's a fault of mine, rather, that I'm just kind of like, I work every day on music. It's great. And I have very little expectation that that's going to amount to anything except me being happy while I'm working on music every day.
So it's very personal.
Super personal, and also...
not tied into ambition specifically.
Yeah, and that might be kind of like a weird or maybe like a naive mindset. But I'm just not thinking about it. I'm not stressed out about it. I'm not trying to like if I feel like there's something I need to share, like this last record I did, like that's definitely something where I'm like, oh yeah, this is totally like, this is it. I have to share this. This is like a big deal. This is like the culmination of a bunch of different stuff, personal stuff, and musical advancements I've made, like from working on stuff where I was like, oh, like this never would have happened a couple of years ago.
Give us some examples of that. What musical changes? Was it recording process? Was it songwriting, or both?
Both for sure. Definitely like always kind of had, like you're talking about being productive. I loved kind of like the process of like, well, let's write a song right now. Let's go.
Right.
Here's how hard can it be? The Beatles spent no more than like 10 minutes
at most
on their entire catalog. From I Want to Hold Your Hand to, Hey Jude. It was all just basically about 10 minutes of work. And so that's probably why I've been so productive, is I haven't put a ton of heart or a ton of work into a lot of these songs.
But in a good way, in a way that doesn't hold you back.
Yeah.
Ways that allow us to create an atmosphere in which you can work, because I see the flip side very common and relate to it myself, where there's too much pressure, there's too much in general going into any of it, to the recording process, to what it has to be, that it has to add up to something, the song has to amount to something.
It's got to be the best thing.
All that.
People, I have so many amazing musician friends who are going to be working on their record for the rest of their lives.
Right.
It's like a hobby or something, and they're like, it's just not quite the right thing. I got to get this. I'm saving up to get this piece of gear that's going to finish my record, and it's never going to happen. Or if they finish the album, they're like, it just wasn't exactly like that thing I wanted it to be. So I always was really, really drawn to the kind of like quick and no, this doesn't really have to be like about changing the world. It can just be about like enjoying the song. And a lot of my favorite songs are written that way. But at a certain point, I was like, well, what would happen if I did that and then took a step back and kind of refined it a little bit? Or what if? And then I found out like, oh well, I don't really want to say that simple, quick thing at all. In fact, that's the opposite of what I want to say. That's like a cop-out to what I'm actually feeling. I was going through like various changes. Like for the first time in my life, I had a 40-hour job.
That's right.
That would, and most people get that right out of college. And I had somehow managed to spend decades just like playing music and traveling around and touring and like living in different places and doing odd jobs and, scraping together and earning financial place and not have to really worry about the 9 to 5 and so I became really accustomed to this kind of like musical way of life that you absolutely cannot keep up if you're working a job like that.
Did you find that it made you value the recording and music time more?
It made me value it in a different way. It made me value it in a way where I was like, oh my God, like what an amazing playground I lived in for those earlier years. I need to like really. It's great that I can like write a song in 10 minutes and people can find it catchy, or there can be something that like hooks the listener with a lyric that seems kind of like, oh, I can sort of relate to that. But like, I really need to step up every game and speak a little bit more from my experiences that in my heart that are sometimes ugly and sometimes stupid and sometimes like, compete and conflict with each other. And that's kind of what started happening. And I started doing the same thing musically too. Like I never really paid much attention to if a song was in tune necessarily, or if a song had like a great guitar sound or like had like, whatever. And I was like, well, like if I tried like a little bit harder and made a little bit more of the time that I had here, I could really make insane steps forward in my art. And that's what started happening. I started working like a little bit more from inside.
Bad blood, saturating the sheets and the blankets. Good God, there are ghosts floating up from the pavement. They flip over the houses. Blood runs out from the basements. And it's unholy flow. It's unholy flow. You remember this whimpering, thick, nauseous feeling from your stepbrother chasing you around with a staple gun. When you were young, it was fun, and then suddenly pain became a very real thing. Do you remember that feeling?
Do you feel like that approach, that mindset of, if it could be summed up, just trying harder in a sort of fearless way that is more intense, maybe more vulnerable, more risky in a way, and takes certainly more energy? Have you felt now that you're applying that, do you see yourself applying that all across the board outside of music and your life in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I do feel like that something that kind of happened with this last record is there's a lot of songs that are kind of like spoken and talky and kind of like just really vulnerable in a way that I've never done before or I've come close to, but this is really, a very, very personal thing it's laid pretty nakedly out there. And people are like, so what's your next record going to be like? And I was like, well, I'm not really thinking about a next record, but I certainly know you can't do less than that now. And I kind of have to apply that to my life as well. I can't really like have this, epiphanal change and then just be like, yeah, cool, that was great. And I'm just gonna like kind of like settle back in this dusty ass couch.
So things will never be the same. You raised the bar, and now you can't fit back under it. You grew.
I grew. But that's another thing I was thinking about. I was like, well, there's a limited amount of time that we have to do anything in our lives.
Yeah, it sounds like you're describing a lot of urgency. There's this feeling of urgency. The pressure is not pressure that you're even putting on yourself. It seems like it came onto you. Something.
I can't really explain it because it wasn't a thing where I didn't feel like driven to be like, this is my master statement. I got it. Like I felt no urgency in the classic traditional senses of it. I was just like, well, you know, like I might not want to be someone who's like making music for other people in 10 years. And I might not have like the ability to go on tour, and maybe no one wants to put my record out, then I can't afford to do it myself. And I've been so lucky to ever have anybody hear my music ever, that maybe I should really, if I find a window to do this and people are listening, this is the time to do it. And that's the only urgency I felt. I didn't feel like I wasn't pushing for anything. I kind of, the record label Polyvinyl, been working with them with different bands and different things, and they've been so supportive forever. And I know that I sell the least records on their label. I know that they just like me. They just believe in my art. It is not lucrative. They lose so much money putting my music out. They should hate me for those reasons. But I sent them the record. I was like, here's this record. It's done. I know you don't want to put it out because, you know, every time you see my royalty reports, you feel faint and queasy and feel so bad about everything that we've done. But if you like it, you can. If not, it's cool. I just had to do this, and then I paid for everything myself. I'm gonna put it on Bandcamp, or I don't even care. I was like, I might just like send it to some friends and have it be that. But they really, really liked it. And they're like, no, let's make this a record. See what happens with it. We'll just do it kind of like short stakes, and you know, we won't make that many of them. But we love it. It's really good. And I think that if you want it to be heard by people, then it can be. And it kind of, in a small way, developed a life of its own that much exceeded anybody's expectations, because it is like a really strange and personal and weird record that a few people have been super excited about. So it's great. But I didn't feel the urgency to even have it be heard necessarily. It was done for a long time before it came out.
Did it feel like this certain type of vitality that allowed you to challenge your old conventions and get this type of focus for this particular project and just dive into this with that sort of strange, incoherent kind of urgency? Like, it's not clear where it's coming from, what it's for. But did you feel like that physical feeling that allowed you to put that kind of energy in?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally.
I noticed that because there's times when you could, and I'm not sure that you would relate to this as much, but if I've been putting something off, there's every now and then, if you're sort of paying attention or looking for it, they'll just suddenly be, and now I'm going to do this thing. And there's this weird inertia that takes over, this propulsive feeling that comes from, it seems like it comes from inside and also outside of you at the same time. And next thing you know, you just worked for 10 hours straight.
Yeah.
And in other times you think, oh, well, that's great. I'll be able to call upon that vitality next time I need to get something done. And it might not be there. And it's odd when you wish that you had more control over that, meaning, do you feel like you can just assume that you'll be able to call upon those types of concentration going forward? I mean, considering that you don't want to go backwards?
That's actually like what you just said. I totally understand that feeling. And talking about like productivity and everything, like when you have that experience where you're like, oh, this kind of happened. I just kind of did this thing, and it kind of almost happened to me or through me or something like that. Like that's actually really smart, because then other times exactly like that, I'll be like, I'm gonna have one of those days and I'm just gonna totally do this thing, and it absolutely does not happen. And I can count my like steps, like pacing back and forth and being like, I'm just waiting for that inspiration to hit me. I'm just gonna have to watch another episode of this show.
Great show.
And wait for it to kind of come up.
The show helps.
The show is all I need. But no, I guess that's something to remember. You can't really rely on that or expect that to be there.
Well, maybe it's sort of a bit of both. Like you want to be out and about so that when it does happen, you can strike. I've heard from some people that I thought was very smart, and it reminded me of what you said, that they recorded every day because they recorded every day. And sometimes that feeling would happen when they were recording, and it would be this great thing.
Yeah.
But most of the time, maybe even 90% of the time, that feeling wasn't really there, and they just were working. And they saw it as an obligation to stay productive, sort of like a batter being at the plate, so that when that perfect pitch comes, they're there to strike the home run. So in that regard, it seems like your familiarity with your own creative process and doing it just for the joy of doing it allows those kinds of moments to happen, and you don't miss them, you know?
Yeah, well, I hadn't thought about it like that, but that's actually totally inspiring to not feel like you're just a total fuck up when that's not happening. You know what I mean? Because like you can't have a moment where you're like, I'm doing everything. This is perfect. This is me now, and it's maybe not even you. It's just you experiencing that surge of inexplicable kind of.
It's very humbling.
Yeah, it's so humbling.
It can be very discouraging, but maybe the best mindset, like you're saying, is just to be very thankful when it comes, and it is like something that's happening to you. It's not like you're happening to it. It's this thing that just happens, and the best you can do is try to create as many conditions to facilitate when it happens, to facilitate it happening, I guess. But it is odd because I think one of the worst feelings in the world, because one of the best feelings I can think of recording experiences where I said to myself as it was happening, maybe sort of after finishing a crucial part of the recording process, like the drum part, or maybe very close to the end of mixing or something, and saying, wow, there's no way that I could imagine feeling any better about anything than I feel about what we're doing right now.
Whoa. And
really know that and take note of it as it was happening. And then there's other times where you're trying to come up with a riff, or I want to ask you about how you write your songs. I'll think, okay, I'm going to write a keyboard part now. Most of my stuff is written on the piano. And the more I play, the worse it gets. And the more I try to extract something, the worse it gets. And I'll be recording and I'll listen back. And I'll think, well, maybe I'm judging it too harsh right now, and I'll find something great in there later. And I'll come back sometimes by myself or sometimes with a friend, and we're both just disgusted. This is just torturous. And you can hear this futile pushing, trying to make something happen that's just not, like someone trying to jump over a hurdle over and over and just nicking it and hitting it and falling over and over and over and over.
With that mindset of like, oh yeah, this hurdle's about to get jumped.
Yeah, like, okay, I can feel it. Like, okay, now I'm going to go to this chord and just... It's time to party, let's party. Everyone just up and have a crazy party. Hey you, let's party. Have a killer party and party. Don't even try and deny it. 'Cause we're gonna have a party tonight. And you know we're gonna do it tonight. We're gonna lose it all when we get over tonight. Party, party. It's gonna be a party tonight.
As a sidebar, do you remember when you and I were younger and we would record songs, just like always making up songs, always just like mostly
as
terrible.
quickly as possible.
Quickly as possible, always like kind of almost like would never think about it. Just like I'd come over to your house.
We just start playing, yeah.
Just like walk into your house, walk into the door. Your mom would try to say hi. I'd be like, no, sorry, playing music already.
We were talking about this the other day, I guess, through text message, and there's one particular aspect to the way we were recording that I never noticed before. Is that we didn't even plan on recording. There wasn't even a question. That to us at that stage, hanging out was you just record.
Yeah.
That we didn't really feel like talking so much. I mean, we would go and drive. I mean, we'd drive around a lot and talk while driving, which was always fun. Go to late night grocery stores and fast food and stuff like that, where there was sort of some activity to be in that you could kind of zone out, but really just conversational. Like people would walk around and talk in a city or something.
Right.
But when you would come over, there wasn't even, okay, you should come over, we'll record. It was just, what else would we do? Right.
And it was sort of this unspoken thing where whatever happened, it was sort of like the hurdle jumping thing where like, it was going to be it was gonna feel really amazing to make, be at least funny, if not good. And I remember was one time we made some recording, mixed it down in the course of like 20 minutes. And the minute we got done making it and mixing it, I was like, let's never listen to that thing. It's so awful. But then we listened to it over and over and over and over. And we listened to it all night, and I kept on being like, yeah, let's really stop listening to this. This is really just like. But there was something about it too that was like, this felt kind of just like put me at odds with myself to make it. Didn't really like it.
It was challenging in those regards, but we were agreeing to be free in that moment, and thinking about it now too for the first time with this perspective. We were just playing.
Yeah,
we were really playing. We happened to be playing music, but it was play in that. There's no pressure. There's no expectations. There's no point to any of it. This isn't a means to an end other than we're playing.
Well,
like building building blocks or something.
I feel like teenagers, especially then, I'm not sure how it feels to be a teenager now. I don't know how teenagers do.
And maybe it could feel amazing.
Could feel amazing.
Feel like shit.
Yeah. At that point, I had no mindset of like there being like stakes or anything to like. It could mean nothing. Everything was innocuous. Everything was a joke and silly, and so much time to do nothing and kind of hang out, and not just in a way where it's like, well, I just kind of doing like the single parent thing now. I gotta like go get up, like I'd love to hang out, but I can't. It was more like, yeah, I had a job, worked all the time, had like people I saw. I wasn't thinking about any of it in the way that would stress me out. And making music was a similar thing where it's like, yeah, let's just play this thing. It's cool. But it's mostly shitty, sort of funny. Like definitely laid the foundation for how I made all my music that followed.
We learned a lot.
Yeah.
That's usually how you learn best, is by playing.
Yeah.
Right? When you can just play around with a piece of equipment, when you can just play around with a basketball, when you just can play around, not that it shouldn't eventually get rigorous, or that even at the early stage there can't be elements that are rigorous, because I took piano lessons. I mean, obviously you had spent a lot of time practicing guitar in a rigorous way that allowed you to develop your basic skills. But then there was this time just to play, and I wonder now, I mean, I can't even think of anything that's quite the equivalent of that, except maybe thinking, sort of playful thinking, where you can think about things in a playful, low impact but in-depth way. I mean, putting all your energy into it completely in the moment, but not necessarily for any purpose, except just to think.
Well, I wonder if people do sort of feel at constant risk too, because everything is recorded now.
Yeah.
Everything you ever say, every tweet that you ever make,
photos,
everything
you do is documented.
Yeah, which is maybe it's always been that way to some extent that we didn't know about, but it's definitely common knowledge now. Like people growing up now grow up very much with this sort of strange, like kind of like pre-famous feeling.
Another layer of self-awareness.
Yeah,
because we're self-aware. And that can be kind of awkward in the early stages. But there's this additional self-awareness of like a camera, some other eye, some other person, just the concept of an other observing you at all, on top of you observing yourself.
Right.
Which then makes it very stressful. I've noticed people actually my age who seem like they're reciting their behavior. And a lot of it seems like it's references from movies, not as a quote for fun, but literally a line from a movie, because they said, okay, this is how you behave. And I wonder if that's because they feel like they're in a movie, which in a way that we all are, and that's a fun idea to think about to an extent, but not when it would inhibit your behavior or modify it to match what you think of as the movie.
Can you give me an example of that?
I was dating this girl who was kind of intense, and it was a girl that in every way I would normally not have dated, so I decided to challenge those conventions. It's basically similar to what you were talking about with recording even.
It worked out great.
In some ways, it was a great life experience. It was one of those experiences that said, okay, this is why I knew I should never do this. But there was good things about it in the physical realm, so to speak. But the things that were strange is I would feel like things that she said and certain movements and ways that she would carry herself and sort of the atmosphere she created when we were together, I felt like I was in a movie. Now that could have been because I was very hyper aware of this situation and how uncomfortable I felt, and that I was challenging myself to do something that felt very wrong for me and against my normal way of being. What's it going to feel like to be like a different person? That's sort of what I was thinking.
But you'd be like, really like to see you later. She's like, oh, come up and see me sometime.
The equivalent of that, yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and not too dissimilar of that. But I couldn't even really describe it at the time, and certainly didn't want to say anything to her about it, because that just adds another layer then of self-consciousness.
Was it funny? Would you sometimes like find yourself like, this is fucking stupid. It
was kind of baffling, but I don't know. I felt more sad and sort of scared.
Yeah.
And also sort of stimulated and excited. Proud of myself for going so far out of my comfort zone and then saying, wow, I guess sometimes your instincts really can be right, and you don't even have to try it to see that it's true.
How you wanna live? Can you conceive of a living wage, or does it all just sound like something somebody else would say? Even when they talk so calmly, they say there's only a couple questions we've gotta ask. You know the pavement is always hungry for those drops of your blood, for that knee in your back. Oh, life is so incredibly long, like a kiss on a bridge between two nervous-ass kids, terrified of doing everything wrong.
Because you mentioned that this album, these songs were more, there was, I don't know if sincerity is the right word, but there was a level of intensity in some way that was personal, that you took more seriously or that you put more of yourself into. It's hard to say it in a way that doesn't belittle the other work or the other approaches, because I think they're all valid. But there was a different tone that you took with it. With that in mind, because you already spoke about it quite well.
And way too much, yeah.
No, perfect amount.
Perfect amount.
How do you think about when you're going out into the world in day-to-day life and not engage in the moment in your work? Do you find yourself trying to grapple with life and the world in general as it relates to your work? And do you feel the need for them to relate, or do you separate them, or do you feel like it's irresponsible for them not to address your life as a person in the world, or do you want to keep them separate and that this doesn't have to have anything to do with daily life in the world?
Wow.
How do you deal with that?
I've never thought about that for a second. That's such an interesting... I mean, it makes sense. It seems like a very simple concept that I probably should have thought about it.
Well, I don't know.
At a certain point. Well, no, it seems like, well, where is this coming from if it is so, like, quote unquote vulnerable and personal and all that shit? But I never, as soon as I'm not recording something, as soon as I'm not working on something, I'm certainly just going to Rite Aid and buying some chips. I'm not like being like, I'm in the Rite Aid, I'm buying the chips. I'm like, and this is like Fred going there doing this thing. Or
Well, that sounds like the self-conscious camera thing again.
Which I have in other ways all the time, constantly. 24/7 feeling bad about myself in other ways.
Good.
But in the way of like my work, it's always just amazing to me, having done music for a long time and seen so many amazing things, you know, and it being separate from a radar of what most people would think of as successful. Like, I talked to my parents and, you know, they wouldn't have any clue if I was like, Mom, I'm going to go play South by Southwest. She'd be like, oh, great.
Okay.
And they always there, and it's cute and wonderful. They're always like, well, we're going to see you on the cover of Rolling Stone pretty soon. I'm like, no, that's never going to happen. It's a different thing. I'm one of like many independent musicians who I'm very lucky to have a record that is manufactured. I'm very lucky to have a show that people are excited to like throw in their town. Very, very, very lucky if anybody comes to that show, but it's at such a small level now. But it's kind of been interesting to feel like this has been my whole life. This has been my whole life of creation. It's on a level that's almost infinitesimal, and it has filled up all of the space in my life, and it's been so exciting. And kind of like there've been a couple years that I was able to just go on tour for most of the year and pay my rent that way. And that's something that most people who start out doing music are not going to even get to that level, that like small, tiny level. So I've always had this mindset of like, that's my work, and that's something that I'm just like so lucky to do when I'm able to do it. And part of what I was talking about earlier of like, oh, I had this like full-time job. I was writing record reviews, which is like kind of ties into that. And I was so lucky to have a job. I was so lucky to like have health insurance for a little bit. I was so lucky to be able to like still have some time off to do a 10-day tour and go to New York and play the Pop Fest, or, you know, have a time where a friend of mine got married and I went and played at their wedding out of the country. And that sort of thing is, you know, I was never thinking about it in terms of like, and this all funnels into like what I'm trying to say, because I felt like I was in a constant state of always saying it.
It was a life. Or it is life.
Yeah,
that's a great way to look at it. And I agree that you're very fortunate. And most of all, as someone who has seen pretty much the whole thing develop, I think one of the things that you're most lucky to have is that ability to see it and be grateful for it, because so many people at various other levels of success or achievement or working within the same realm wouldn't have the perspective or even the care to develop the perspective to look at it even the way you just described.
Well, thank you.
So that's perhaps the greatest thing to develop of all, is the ability to be introspective with your own life and to look at it as something that you built because you enjoyed building it. And of course, there was goals and there's things that there are achievements within any of that, but it is the whole endeavor itself, like an adventure.
Yeah.
Right. So it's good adventure. And do you feel like this album has that feeling to it? Because it seems like it does to me.
I think it does have sort of like looking at life. It kind of has like, people have been like, it sort of seems like had like your life flash before your eyes.
Yeah.
You're kind of like having a thing where you're kind of recounting like some stories. And I was like, well, I feel like that's my constant state of affairs, is like always remembering something that happened a long time ago. It doesn't really relate to the present. I'm still here in the present. So, and it's kind of like the thing that happens when you graduate high school and then fast forward 20 years, you're still
thinking about high school.
I was going to say still doing the same things you were. Like, I'm still like...
Yeah, we talked about that quite a bit.
Just still kind of like playing some of the same venues in the same town. Like, that's great. In some ways, it might be kind of depressing to some people, might be like exciting to some people. It kind of is a matter of perspective.
Well, it was a choice. So in that regard, I think it's as noble as anything could ever be. And a lot of people that we've seen, that we've discussed, that did not do that and may have chosen not to do it, just as many of them didn't choose to stop living the way they wanted, or they felt pressured to do so. So it's always very encouraging and very inspiring. I mean, the older that I get, the more inspired I am to see, well, you and other people that I consider my peers, but also people that are twice our age, who are still doing it.
No, it's amazing.
And doing it not in the exact same way, but in their own way that they clearly always did too. And they never felt this need that they had to abandon that, or that they had to suddenly. It's always this feeling of you have to get into real life. I remember people were telling me that from when you and I first met, that eventually you're going to see how the real world is, and you have to give all this up.
Yeah, certainly.
And it seemed like the exact opposite to me, and to most of the people I was fortunate enough to be surrounded by, was that no, the whole point is you give everything else up so that you can keep doing this, no matter what. Right. Really with sort of by whatever means necessary, and this pressure to give in and essentially give up is that's the lie. Not that we're too idealistic to live this way. It's worth whatever it takes to do, because there's no, what else are you gonna do? That's what you're saying. This is your life. Yeah. And now doing it for, I mean, you're what, almost 60?
Almost 65.
Okay, so doing it for almost 40 years.
44.
You can really say that it is your life, and it's not just this thing you're doing before your life starts, or it's sort of in the early parts. Because when we were back then, we were young enough to still sort of feel like this wasn't that consequential in the grand scheme. But now we're, some could say, halfway through. This is life now.
Yeah, and doesn't, I mean, and I don't want to think about things in terms of like, well, when is this going to stop?
Exactly.
It's so stupid. Like, I remember.
I used to kind of think that it was. I mean, for me, subconsciously, it wasn't that when is it going to stop, but there was this sense of, wow, maybe things will never go back to normal, which really was just high school.
Right.
Because that's when sort of a scheduled life, every day being very similar, when that stopped. And I kept realizing, I didn't want it to go back to that. But I kept realizing that maybe it wasn't so much even the schedule, but just the way that kind of life felt. Whatever that is, it's very hard to describe. But you can remember being in school and the way that felt. And certain other times when we've had jobs, maybe for a month, life felt a certain way.
Yeah, totally.
But then it would change again. And then you realize, wow, maybe it's going to be like this forever now. It's just going to be this, it's never going to go back to that.
Or like the other thing that I always think about, like, a friend of mine was talking recently about, like, yeah, I put this record out by myself. I've lost so much money, and like, you know, maybe I just gotta like do this. I was like, well, think about, like, you've been doing music for a long time. Money is not the gauge by which you actually like are measuring your success. You got to travel the world. You got to do all sorts of things. Saying this to my friend, I was like, I've done all this stuff. Like, I've lost tons of money trying to do music stuff, but like, I know people who I graduated high school with, and they're like, yeah, you know, I went gambling in Vegas this summer. Going to go back there. And that's like, it's the same thing. It's just like, it's just this idea of like, and I'm not trying to say like, well, this is the way to live and this is good. And like, if you don't live this way, you're a boring sheep.
I like gambling.
Well, it's a gamble. You
gamble.
You gamble.
Now what you've got to do is to develop a system.
by which you put
To beat the
coins
slot.
into the slot and expect more.
So you're saying that, yeah, people are you're gonna lose money or spend money one way or the other. So why
Might
not
as well have the most possible fun and doing what you want to do.
do it? Yeah, in the way that it feels. I think that for whatever reason, and I'm very curious as to why you think you developed this. This maybe this will be my last question. I mean, how long have we been going at this point?
Good 5-6 minutes.
5 minutes, 6 minutes.
Stop soon.
Really, just 6 minutes? It felt like almost 8 minutes, maybe even 10. And maybe to someone listening to this will relate or will find this useful, but I'm very curious about your situation, because not that your parents weren't encouraging or supportive, but as you've described already in some of this, there's some kind of slight disconnect that doesn't come from a lack of love. But what do you suppose, meaning some people from day one, their parents were musicians and they were in the recording industry and they taught them all this and they got them.
That's all they're ever going to do, right?
Right. Or someone else, for whatever reason, had, I was very lucky to have a lot of support, even in very harebrained ideas that I had. Not without concern, but definitely support and engagement and care and all that. But what do you think it is to someone like you that gave you the nerve to think that you could live this way, this other way, that isn't like so many of our friends that did what we might call the straight and narrow, which at times we've even talked about, maybe we messed up, maybe there's something to that. We thought it was so obvious that you shouldn't do that. But what do you suppose?
That's the only thing you should have done with your time, actually. From grade one,
you should have stayed
the
straight and narrow. But was it just you had such a clear love for what you do that there was no question that that's what you're supposed to do? Do you think other people just didn't believe that they could do what they love to do?
No, I feel it's a complex question, and it is a complex thing because at a certain time I might have felt self-righteously that way, as anybody's felt in their life, like, oh, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and this is all I can do and this is really it. But that kind of gets more into that sort of like, I didn't have those feelings. Some movie somewhere told me that. Like somebody else is not doing something wrong. Everybody's got something to do. True. And everybody is only ever looking for their place. Yeah,
they're on their own path in whatever way.
And that's something that I'm sure everyone deals with from the age of cognizance to the grave. And my version of that is just that I remember like trying to go to college. And
that's right.
Yeah, I went for like a year, and it was the time when I was doing a band around Ypsilanti called Chore, and we were just one of those bands that played house parties every weekend. And I didn't drink at the time at all. It wasn't about like, I'm just like too fucked up and just like doing my thing. I was like so single-mindedly excited about, I wrote a new song. I wrote too many songs for Chore, so I have like all these other songs like on my little cassettes that I don't play for anybody, or I make 4 copies of, and it's all I really wanted to do because I couldn't have been more excited about anything, and I couldn't have been less excited about the stuff that I was supposed to be excited about. Like, people talk about, oh, it's quite cool, going to go to college in the fall, and freshman year is going to be so cool, and I think I registered for classes like 4 weeks late. It was really something where I got there that, are you sure you still want to register? You're halfway through the semester. And
you were taking the bus there, right?
I was taking the bus.
You were writing a magazine at that point too, a zine.
Doing a zine, staying up so late. I remember my dad at one point he was like, Fred, you slept in through your class again. I was like, Dad, I can't wake up at 11 a.m. It's so early. And he's like, God damn it! How are you gonna ever? Do you think you can get a job where you don't have to be there till 11 a.m.? That's why you have to go to school. He was so mad about it. But I just stayed up till 4 or 5 in the morning every night doing something that I found so fun.
Crossing T's.
I had a typewriter that didn't have a T on it, so I had to write.
You had to handwrite in the T.
Yeah, I had to handwrite in the T on my zine. That wasn't going to do it. I didn't have an intern.
No, you weren't going to buy a replacement T.
Yeah, there's no other way that could have been done. There's no possible thing I could have done except that, and it just kind of. And I also just wasn't ever worried about it for some reason. I looked at the people who were like, but then I got it. It kind of felt like, and maybe I had a privilege I didn't know about, but I did have friends who were like, I either have to go in the Army, or sell mattresses at my dad's mattress factory, museum, or I have to go to school and do really, really well and not have any friends, or I have to they had like 3 choices. Like, the outcome of all of them was to make money for somebody else, And well, I got this this apartment. This apartment's like not cheap, and like I had to like get a fucking flat screen television for it, so that's not going to pay for itself. And my car, and I got these payments and like all these things that kind of were going towards a happiness that I felt that I already had just hanging out by myself and recording music, which is lonely and sometimes weird and definitely alienating, because when you're young, like people are trying to figure out their identity, figure out who they are, and a lot of choices get made that don't really get questioned at that time. We're like, oh, well, but do you really need to do these things, or do you really like the way you're acting, or
what's it supposed to achieve? What's it supposed to get you when you already have what you need?
Yeah.
You already were happy.
Yeah.
So you didn't need to strive for anything more. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I've always felt like some element of that. Not to say that my life has been super easy or posh, and I definitely also very, very early on was like, well, I could probably just be poor and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I don't see, like, I'm always happy to work when I need to work. I'm always happy to like not work at all when I have enough money to coast through. Like it never struck me that the fear that a lot of people feel like, well, I can't just like be playing like these they don't pay. The house parties don't pay any money. Like you can't, how are you going to buy your next guitar? It's like, oh,
it's true.
Yeah. So that was kind of something I always.
A lot of our friends were like that. And many of them still are, at least in spirit, where I was always fascinated too. It made sense though, because it wasn't, sometimes I could see it as though people thought that this sort of ambivalence about money was a fear of responsibility.
Sure.
But it wasn't. It was just saying, I already am happy with exactly how things are, and this is what matters to me, not trying to get more just for the sake of it, because then I could get more and have more. I mean, in terms of complicating their lives, they kept things very simple in a way that made life more fun.
Yeah.
It was a better version of life than even having more and having to work for it. And it's really been great to see how that's panned out. And it wasn't a fluke, and it wasn't just someone. These are like people being very true to themselves and not feeling or getting pressured into really selling themselves out to what they really felt.
Well, it's interesting you say it wasn't
against what they felt.
It wasn't a fluke, but it also wasn't some prescribed like doctrine. It wasn't like, well, we all like we're like Zen Buddhists and we just never believed in having stuff and we shunned money. It's like, no, everybody on a very individual level of our friend group had different kind of takes on this kind of like getting by and having fun, and it changed for some people. And probably listeners out there might be hearing this and being like, oh, I knew a person like that, and they're really weird and they never had anything in their house or whatever, but it didn't seem like something that was some hive mind mentality. It was just kind of like, well, this person did it this way, this person did it the other way, but there were some similarities there.
It just wasn't important to them. And I don't think that for some of these people, it even occurred to them that it was ever anything that would be important to anybody.
Yeah.
Like having a certain type of object or of a certain level of quality. It's like, well, what does it do? So what?
Yeah.
Why would I spend money on that when I could do this thing? I mean, all I ever cared about with money, and pretty much to this very day, is what can I do with it to continue this thing that I'm having fun doing? I mean, if we have more money, okay, well, we can get another light. If we have more money, I can get that better keyboard. Okay, if we have more money, we can add another member to the band or whatever it might have been at the time. It was always for the project, and that project was what you wanted to spend all your time doing, and that project sort of becomes your life.
I remember when I lived in New York for a couple of years, and
I didn't see you once the entire time.
There's one time, the cake shop gig.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't count that because it was a show.
Okay. Yeah, we didn't ever hang out at all in that time. But it was a busy day. But there was a friend of mine, and when people move to New York, maybe have this experience too. Like, that's all anybody wants to talk about for like the first, I don't know, like probably the entire time. But like I remember like being in New York, and people were like, oh, you just here? What you gotta know is this. New York is like blah 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 blah. And so I had so many like conversations with people about, because it's a hard place to live, it's a hard place to get acclimated to. Mm-hmm. But I was talking to this person, this friend of mine, and they're like, well, it's like everything is like a nonstop competition. I look at like another person on the street, I look at what clothes they're wearing, because I gotta get better clothes than them. Otherwise, they're gonna get the job that I want, and that way they're gonna get the money. I'm gonna be fucking living in the gutter. And I was like, I was just baffled. Out of my mind with bafflement, because I was like, that's absolutely untrue. No part of that is true. If you look at life as a competition that starts at the clothes, like starts at like your feet, and like tucks you in at night, and kind of like dominates
And
every
the
single
extreme to the gutter.
Yeah, straight to the gutter. It's either like the best clothing known to man, the finest silks, or the gutter.
Linens, velvet.
Some linen, some Velcros, but nothing. But there's nowhere to rest your head in between. It seemed like a terrible way to live.
Well, you got to experience that city and a lot of other places in your travels without having to participate in that, what they call the rat race, and that's something we should be very thankful for.
Yeah.
But I think some people love it. Again,
Yeah,
like you were
that's true.
saying, some people love the rat race. Some people totally are born to do it as much as anyone's born to do anything, as you've said very well, because even that mindset is a little closed-minded. You're born to live, as far as we know.
Yeah.
And everything else after that, we should stay pretty fluid and respond as we go. Well, tell people, I suppose, where the best place is to get the record. Maybe they'll put a link up.
Yeah, I think there might be a link. I think that it's been discontinued at this point, actually.
We were supposed to do this interview a while ago.
There's a problem.
Well, hey, it's sold out. It's not discontinued.
Actually, all the copies
are
got
sold out.
destroyed because there was
Oh.
a sampling issue where I
Are
sampled.
you serious?
No, I'm not serious. The record is Fred Thomas. All are saved. You can find it at polyvinylrecords.com. Andrew, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Yeah,
This
it was a
great.
pleasure. Wouldn't have missed it for the world. Quick.
And that's it for this edition of the Talkhouse Music Podcast. Thanks to Fred Thomas for recording the conversation, and to our producer-engineer Elia Einhorn for making it into a podcast. For more Talkhouse Music podcasts, by all means visit our SoundCloud page or subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes. And to read smart, notable musicians writing about new music, please do visit thetalkhouse.com/music.